So there's this beautiful story of Franz Kafka, who was the Bohemian novelist and short story writer. He lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he's 40 years old, he's walking in a park in Berlin. He was never married or had children. And he says, as he's walking in the park, there's a little girl just crying her eyes out. And he asks her what's wrong, and she said, "I've lost my doll, I can't find my doll anywhere." And so he joined her and started looking all over, and they couldn't find the doll anywhere. And he goes, "Well, let's meet back tomorrow here at the same time, and let's see if we can find her then." So they meet back the next day, and they realize the doll's still not there. So he gives her a letter, and in the letter, it's the letter from the doll. And the doll says, "Don't cry. I need to travel the world. So I'm going to write to you about my many adventures." And so from that moment on, Frank Kafka and this little girl would meet in the park, and he would bring her these letters from her doll, who was having all these wonderful grand adventures all around the world, and she just loved it and was enchanted by it. He only lived till he was 41, so it was a short time as he's knowing it's time to come to an end. So he goes out and buys her a new doll, and he gives it to her, and she says, "That's not my doll." And so with the doll comes a letter, and the letter says, "All my trips have changed me. I'm still your doll, I'm just changed." And she got it, and she accepted it, and embraced her new doll, and went home happily, and he died soon afterwards. When she got older, she noticed there was this little tiny letter tucked away in the doll's crevice that she had never noticed, and she pulled it out, and it said, "Though very often the things that we love will be taken from, will be lost, in the end, love always returns." But it's changed. And I love that because when we give ourselves to love, we change. It is the most powerful force in the universe. And when we allow its full sway in our life, it will grow us, it will heal us, and it will evolve us. They say, God comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. Love comforts us when we need that comfort, and surrounds us in that wholeness and that perfection when we need to be rest and to know that we are always cared for. And love will also push. When we start feeling very comfortable, it's not a stagnant energy. That love, as it's showing up in time and space, has been evolving this planet, this universe, this cosmos. It's evolving us. We don't know where it's evolving us to, but we know that we're growing. There's a thing called spiral dynamics that talks about how this earth has been evolving. It's spiraling, so it keeps coming back to certain places, but at every time it's going a little bit further along in the evolutionary path. So it's a really interesting dynamic to be aware of. And that we as human beings go along a very similar path of evolution. So any child who is born, we know this already, children develop, they evolve, they go through their different stages of development, and we've gotten so good at recording it and being able to witness it. So something that we think is very maybe personal to us, now we know this is just a stage of development that they need to go through in their evolution. So toddlers and teens, they say, are a lot alike because that's part of their individuation. They have to push away to find that own inner voice. That's every human being does that. It's part of this evolutionary growth. What's interesting is that when I took several child development classes when I was a psychology major, and he would say that it ends. All these developmental classes would say it sort of ends around 25, generally. And that adults don't really continue to grow, which is how I learned it. But since then, we've discovered, no, adults do grow. What happens often, though, is when we start settling down, getting married, having kids, the growth spurt stops because we have to make money. We have to raise our own children. It's not time to start exploring our own beliefs. We have to give them a set of beliefs and structures for them to learn and carry them and grow them. So what they find is that often when the children leave home, growth starts picking up again. But not in everyone. That adult developmental growth seems to be where it's biological, so much growing up. As we become adults, it doesn't seem as inevitable. Some people really continue to grow and evolve and others don't. And I remember Ken Wilber, who's an integral philosopher, saying we don't really know what makes people continue to push past their previous developmental age and move into the next one. I was thinking, whenever there's a puzzle, I like to think about it. Because one of the things that was interesting to me is I could actually see the stages as we learn these different stages of development. So I was learning them, and I could see when I would make those shifts, and they call it an earthquake, that you're going through because it's very disorienting. You have a whole set of values and how you see the world and perceive your world, and generally all the people that you surround yourself agree with how they see the world. So you're in a way of understanding how the world works, and then suddenly it all falls apart. You don't understand the world in the same way that you used to understand it. The people in your lives you're not as drawn to them. You're looking for something new. So I was looking at these times where I made these different developmental stage jumps, and I was thinking, well, why did I do that? And every time the answer was because love was pushing me. I didn't choose it. Because it's uncomfortable. It's disorienting. Relationships change. Environment changes. Things aren't going to stay the same. We don't go towards challenge often without some sort of push. And the thing that I did choose, the one thing I was very clear is I chose the divine, the transcendent, divine love, this absolute unconditional love. And every time in choosing that, it was going to push me out of my comfort zone. Any place where I was feeling like, I got this, I know what I'm doing, bam, hello. Here's a place where you don't have. Here's a place you're not familiar with. And it's always a gift, and it's always growing us. Love changes us. It asks us to continue to grow and expand and deepen and widen and heighten on every level and dimension of our being. So I often talk about writers or spiritual teachers because they often inspire us. Today, I want to talk a little bit about a spiritual community that is an inspiration to me, and sometimes we can be inspired by other spiritual communities. I know many of you have been very involved in other spiritual communities, sometimes for a short period, sometimes for a long period, and we have many. And in all my conversations with you, the amount of gifts that we've received from these previous spiritual communities are wonderful. And so I'm just going to share this one community because it's had a big impact on my life, and that's the Agape community down in Los Angeles. It's a community like this, non-denominational. It's a big center. But when I was there, it was a mega center, and it still is. Reverend Michael Beckwith, who some of you may have heard of, he's the minister there. And so it's beginnings, 1986. Well, actually, it started in 1986, but it started before then. So Reverend Michael on his own was getting this vision. Now, while he's getting this vision, he and his best friend, Reverend Nirvana Gale, they grew up in the hood together. They're both African American, by the way. Were starting to do these. They were practitioners, and they were doing these agape love workshops all over L.A. And Reverend Nirvana was the one who's always in the lead. He's an extrovert. He loves talking, and Reverend Michael would sit quietly in the back, not saying much, participating, but clearly Nirvana was the guy. And then they were listening, and suddenly it came to Reverend Michael that he was to be the minister of this community. Now, they both were inspired by Martin Luther King's beloved community, the ideal of a beloved community. So he was on his own asking, what does this look like? What does my ministry look like? What am I creating? And as he's getting clearer, and the beloved community is so important, he got 20 people together. Now, I'm not totally sure that they're all practitioners. I think they were, but I'm not totally sure. So he gets these 20 people together, and they do a visioning process. Many of you know what the visioning process is. That's where they got into a circle, not visualizing, but visioning, where they would anchor themselves in spirit, in love, and ask, what is God's vision for this ministry? And then they receive. And so the thing they kept receiving is agape, God's unconditional love. For those of you who don't know, agape is a Greek word. There's 4 types of love: familial love, romantic love, platonic love, friendship love, and then agape love, which is God's love. And that this community was to be anchored in God's love. Someone asked me, well, if they got the answer right off, why do they keep asking the question week after week like they didn't know? That's a really, really important question, and to really understand why agape is such an extraordinary community. I can sit here and say, be unconditional love. We want to be, we can talk the words. But we're actually talking about a very, very high vibration. Humanly, we don't even come close to what divine love is. If I love someone, my heart's open and I love, but it is so small compared to this extraordinariness of divine love. If you've ever experienced it, you know what that's like. It's just, we can't even put it into words. It's so extraordinary. There's no walls, there's no borders. It's just overpowering. So what they were doing every week by going into that vibration was they weren't just talking about unconditional love. They were, as a community, as this group of 20 people, were raising themselves up every single week to feel and experience a love that is beyond this world, a transcendent love, and they just basked in that love together. And then the questions would always come, for those of you who have done visioning, what's my greatest area of growth and what do I need to release? And those were the questions of, okay, here's this high vibration and we've just been basking in it. Now what do I need to do to start really being this high vibration in my world? Where's my growth this week? What do I need to release this week? And they would very actively participate in praying for one another to do their growth work. And so they did this every single week for an entire year. You can imagine the powerful love energy that they began to embody with each other. The beloved community was already happening in their various living rooms. So when they started the community, that high vibration of agape love just magnetized people. So it started real fast. It had a little bit of a contraction, and then it just exploded. Just lots of people coming in. And generally, people's feelings when they go is, wow, I've never experienced anything like that before. And sometimes they couldn't remember what the talk was about. You know, you can't always, you just feel the feelings. There's an energy there. It is because they were living in this incredible vibratory energy. You can watch it online, Agape Services, but it's not the same as actually being there and experiencing this expansive energy of pure, unconditional love. And everything in that service is evoked to bring forth that unconditional love. Many people think, who know Reverend Michael or watch him, think he is very spontaneous in his talks, but the service is not at all spontaneous. There is a huge commitment Reverend Michael was demanding of everybody who is participating, that if you are participating in this service, you are a vehicle of love. You are not here to show yourself off. You are here to be in service to love. So every musician, every person who set up chairs, ushers and greeters, there is trainings on ushers and greeters to get them into the right consciousness and space. So everybody who was participating was consciously participating and activating this powerful and divine love. Why is this community extraordinary? Because one of the things it asks us to do when we open our hearts that big is to accept people that are different from us. What started to happen as this church started to grow was this group of 20 people, they kept visioning to keep that vibration high amongst themselves. And what they started to discover in their discussions with each other was that they didn't really like the church growing that much because they had created such an incredibly intimate group amongst themselves that when all these other people started coming, they felt a little bit invaded, like we like being with each other. And I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where you like, it's not that you like everybody, you're kind to everybody, but you really want to hang out with your people. There's an intimacy that's developed with your people. They know your story, they've been there for you during the ups and the downs. These are my people. And so there's this automatic magnetism to the people that you feel comfortable with, and they were not really, they found they were being kind and nice and generous, but they weren't really that excited to be very close to anyone but this group of people. So then the next year, what they're doing every week is working on their willingness to be madly in love with everybody who enters the doors, just as deeply and madly in love as they were with the 20 people in that circle. And even with a group of 20, there's the little tribe. You know, little groups, we can't help it. So it's not to say we don't have people that we're not magnetized to, the people we prefer to be with we just have different personality styles. But the question is are we willing to open our hearts completely to people who we don't feel that towards? And if you're going to have a community about unconditional love, it's going to invite us many times to go past our borders of comfort, to open our hearts to experience deep and profound love for people that we don't necessarily wouldn't hang out with in general. And of course, what happened is that this became a community that wasn't about a religion, it was about love. So it drew in people that were, my favorite was when I was sitting there and this Buddhist came in, and he was a Buddhist priest. And he goes, oh yeah, I do my services, and then I close the temple down and I come here. I thought that was so awesome. And then there's a Jewish group that used to meet there in the Sunday evenings, but they would come to the services. And then there was a whole group of people that as soon as service was over, they'd go off to City Yoga. It was Guru Mai at the time. I mean, at least 100 people would go off and they'd go out and start chanting with Guru Mai. So it was a community that literally, and it was diverse, different cultural backgrounds, that you had all this diversity, and it was just accepted. It wasn't, we are a religion. Even though at the time he was part of Centers for Spiritual Living, he didn't talk about that because he wasn't trying to get people in part of a religion. He wanted people to be there for one reason and one reason only, to be there for the divine love, to allow it to become an incredible force. I remember going to a friend's marriage, and there were some gay couples dancing together, and this was normal at Agape, and you didn't think about it because there are no walls. But I remember there were people who were at the wedding who weren't from our community, and at that time it was strange. And I thought, and it didn't even occur to me until someone said it. I'm like, why would that be? Because everything was accepted. And I remember when I first left Agape and went back out into the world, the amount of people, the separation. And I hadn't realized how blessed I was to be in a community where that just wasn't an issue. Well, we'll talk about it in a bit. It was open and accepted. Everything was open and accepted. Everybody was open and accepted. But it doesn't mean, so then people were also growing, love will always grow you. So there were things that were uncomfortable. There always is. We're people. If you ever want to have people mess up the divine, we do it really well. So a whole bunch of practitioners started going to a program called at University of Santa Monica, the Masters of Psychology program, and a lot of it was motivated by Gay and Catherine Hendricks, who were more psychologically oriented, and it was a Masters of spiritual psychology, but it was very psychological. And why they were doing it, because they were finding that in all this divine love, there were things that weren't getting talked about, issues were coming up, because what we also discovered was that in the midst of all this love, people would use it, we still are human, and we use it maybe to manipulate somebody or try to get what they want. So this did not last, but there was, for a while, they called them the parking lot guys, and they would stand out in the parking lot and wait. LA's full of beautiful women, and they would just wait to hug all the women because we're all about unconditional love. They're not dumb. And they would stand out there, but women started saying, long before me too, this was 20 years, this is the 1990s, women started saying, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. You're in a service, your heart's wide open, and then you come out and you have all these guys waiting to hug you. And so they started talking about it. You can't hide these things, and saying, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. And I remember watching this one woman saying, no, you're not, the guy went in to hug her, she goes, no, I'm happy to, and she just she made a boundary. And soon as more women started talking about it, that no longer exists, and it stopped existing, but it came by being honest. So unconditional love isn't unconditional acceptance of all behaviors, right? And so of our own behavior, so we have to be unconditionally loving with ourselves because we have behaviors, that secret agendas, things that we want, we have to be honest with ourselves about it because it's going to start coming out in unhealthy ways. We have to be aware those dynamics show up so much with other people. The more we are honest with ourselves, the more we can be honest with other people, always from a place of love, not to shame anyone, but saying this is not okay, or it makes mostly what I love about the Hendricks, it's always taking how I feel. I'm not trying to make you wrong. This is how I feel. I feel uncomfortable when you do that. Or it's taking ownership. The more we do that, we start to feel safe enough to actually go back. It's that spiral. Now we're still experiencing love and community, and it's even deeper now because I've said my truth, or I'm being honest with myself, that divine love is so powerful. And it changes us, and it heals us, and it grows us, and it evolves us. That those walls, growth is egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmic-centric. growth is always about inviting more and more people in our world in a healthy way. But even if it's unhealthy, we still love them, but maybe from a distance, but still letting them in our heart, keeping our hearts open to all people. And so part of being on this spiritual journey, the love of many colors, is saying, am I open and willing to accept all the different colors that are showing up? Racial, sexual orientation, religious, non-religious, all the different ways people, we talk about it, all the ways people are unique. How much am I genuinely willing to love someone who's very different than me? So one of my greatest models for this pure unconditional love was Reverend Nirvana Gale. I said he and Reverend Michael co-founded Agape. So I'm going to tell 2 Reverend Nirvana stories. Some of you have heard them. And I actually put out an email on the minister's listserv because I got curious about repeating stories. I was asking people, when do you repeat stories? And there are certain stories that you don't want to repeat just because it was an only okay story, but then there's certain stories that are so of God, that are so rich, that we can continue to return to them over and over and find something new or something that reminds us of who and what we are. So for me, my Reverend Nirvana stories are stories that I will continue to come to because they represent something that is so pure and so powerful that I think about them all the time in my head. So to bring it forth every once in a while in this community is to remind ourselves of what's possible, what divine love looks like. So when I met Reverend Nirvana, the first time he ever hugged me, so I had an experience as a child of divine love, and I always wondered, it was so separate than the human experience, and I always wondered, what would that be like to experience that humanly? And I remember the very first time he hugged me, I'm like, that was divine love. That was as close to that divine experience that I've ever had, and it was just a hug. Now, Reverend Nirvana was someone who was so full of love, and at the same time, he was a very big personality, and used to wear he wore an all-yellow suit, but he'd wear a yellow hat and yellow shoes, too, and a feather. He was a big personality, and he never bowed down to anyone or worried about what other people thought of him, and he was very honest and direct. He was not someone who was just nice or kind. He was real, and he was honest because he knew he was always coming from love. So I knew I love Reverend Nirvana, I knew this about him, and I was in my first year of ministerial school. I was at a retreat. My first husband was also in ministerial school. He was a year ahead of me. And this is before I came out of my own shyness. So I was still at the point of I never talked in classes. I kept to myself. And at ministerial school, at this retreat, so it was the first time my husband and I were together at the ministerial retreat, and I was feeling very intimidated, insecure. He knew everybody. He was very confident. I was still very shy and insecure. And he and I got in a fight about something, and I'm the one who created the fight. I was mad about something, but it was coming from my insecurity, and I'm just so mad at him. And then he leaves, and he goes and tells Reverend Nirvana, and I am absolutely mortified. Oh, by the way, I'm working at Agape now, too, and Reverend Nirvana is my boss. So it's an important detail. So, well, it's a detail of what was going on in my head. Reverend Nirvana is not shy. He'll tell you what he thinks. And now it's out that I'm not going to be a good minister because here I am on my first ministerial retreat picking a fight with my husband. Man, it sucked. And I didn't know what to do. There was nowhere to hide. There was nowhere to go. All my darkness was being seen by a person that I admired greatly and only wanted him to think good things about me. So he comes over and I know he's going to talk to me. I see him walking towards me. I'm like, oh, no. And I'm bearing myself up because, like I said, Nirvana, he's not afraid to speak the truth. So I was sure he was going to say, look, you're in ministerial school now. You got to step up. You got to start practicing these principles. You got to start showing up. I had the whole thing of what he's going to be saying to me. And he starts looking at me, and he just starts talking. And he goes, well, I don't know what you see, but this is what I see. And he starts saying all these incredibly beautiful things to me. When you're feeling this big and humiliated and embarrassed and ashamed, and in the midst of that total constriction, someone is pouring love on you, undeserved love in my head in that moment. I did not deserve that love. I deserved to be reprimanded. I deserved to be called out and told the truth to. And he's like, I am telling you the truth. And he started speaking. And the reason why I can't tell you what he said is because I don't remember what he said. The only thing I remember was, I think it's why I love using the ocean, the oceanic piece in the ocean. It was waves and waves of love just pouring over me. That when we're this small, to feel the power of God's love in the midst of wherever we are, pouring over us and saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I see you, I love you, I see you, I love you, you are not who you think you are, I love you. No matter all the insecurity you have, I love you. No matter all the dark stuff you have, I love you. No matter what you're going through, I love you. To feel that, not just in words, not just theoretically, but to feel the energy pouring over you, there is instant and amazing healing. It was unbelievable to me, and I walked away from that just disoriented because love had just completely changed my world of that I was still lovable and seen and accepted even when I behaved in a way that was repellent to me. And I'm like, this is what God's love is. I get it. Unconditional love, no conditions, no judgments. It was right there in front of me through another person. And that was the first time I'd ever experienced that profound love, not just through in the spiritual, by myself in a room, but through another person, that vehicle loving me. This is what's possible for all of us. Often in spiritual community, people actually see the worst of us. And we remember having a conversation, well, why would that be? Because if you've ever been in a relationship and you actually start to feel safe, a lot of that stuff that's hidden starts to come out. This darker stuff that you can hide with most people at work or in even family situations, but maybe not with your romantic partner or not in a community that says, I love you unconditionally. Those things that come out, like that insecurity of mine, it comes out. It would come out, and I wanted to control it, but I couldn't because I was surrounded by so much love. So it's an interesting thing being in a spiritual community, to have a community totally about being unconditional love, and at the same time, some of our darker, scariest things about ourselves often come out in the midst of that seem everything unlike love. And so we as a spiritual community get to practice, how are we going to respond? And I might get triggered. So so Reverend Nirvana wasn't even remotely triggered. If he was remotely triggered, then imagine that conversation. And those conversations did happen because there would be things that would happen, but I was amazed by speaking our truth, by being honest about what was going on, because we trusted love, that we could be honest about our dark stuff, they would be honest about their dark stuff, and we would get to a place of pure love and healing and acceptance. But everyone has to be in. Everyone has to be into telling the truth, because we trust love so much that we can speak the truth, that we can allow ourselves to heal and to grow and to evolve and to become more than we were the other day. Love, what we love will often be taken from us, as Kafka said, but it will be returned, renewed, and regenerated. That's this incredible journey we're on. And then as we continue to learn about this in our communities, I know you already all know this, and we live this out in our world. One of my favorite stories that Reverend Nirvana gave, and then I'll be done with my Reverend Nirvana stories today. By the way, he has transitioned to the other side, which is one of my deep sadnesses, because he won't be here for the ordination, because he's an extraordinary man. So he was at my installation. By the way, just as we're thinking about ordination, we had a great time. We had a Thursday night event, we had a Friday night event, we had a Friday day event, Friday night event, Saturday event, and Sunday event. We made a party of it, just throwing out the ideas. So Reverend Nirvana... It was great. And so Reverend Nirvana gave the talk on Sunday morning. And I remember the talk, everything. It was just one of those moments. He was brilliant and beautiful, and because I know him, the stories rang true. And he told many stories, so I'll just share one of the stories. His topic, his theme, I remember, how many years was this ago? His topic was one in God as a majority. First person I heard said that was Ernest Holmes, one in God as a majority. There's only one power and one presence. When we align ourselves with that oneness, we are in line with the only power, the only love, the only grace that exists. So what does that look like? So Reverend Nirvana while he was an assistant minister at Agape, that didn't pay him enough financially, so he also worked for the government, so he had a good pension plan too. So he was still working with the LA Children and Family Services. And there was a point where he was in a juvenile center. It's not a jail, but you know what I mean. Correctional facility. And the other staff member had to step out, and suddenly he was in this open room with some people of color who were gang members, and there was one individual who had just arrived who was a white supremacist. Remember, Reverend Nirvana is African American. And he was watching, realizing, first of all, he's the only staff member in the room, and he's watching as these people of color, the gang members, are all coming together, and they're looking over at this guy. And it's clear, they're like, this is our chance. This guy's going down. And so they all got up together and start walking towards this young man. Reverend Nirvana stands up in front of them, and he says, you're not going to touch him. You're going to have to come through me, and I'm here for God. I'm here for love. And he just made his stand for the one power and the one presence, and that is all that is real. And I am here for love, and you're going to have to walk through love to get to him. And remember that story about the waves and waves of love, that it's so much more powerful than words, that this is a tangible energy? I know that's what they were experiencing, that he just stood and made that stand, and they all backed off. They all said no, and they could have easily taken him. And then he went over and talked to the young man who was a white supremacist and started building, who just knew that he saved his life, that he literally would not have survived that if Reverend Nirvana had not stood in the one power, one presence. And Reverend Nirvana started talking to this young man, not just this one time, but every time he came. They built a relationship. And the young man left the group, the white supremacist group. He realized he was being taught by Nirvana what true love was, seeing people who were different than him, people who looked different, but their hearts were the same, and he was being healing. His life was not just saved physically, it was saved spiritually from the love that Reverend Nirvana was. All that love that as he was part of this agape group, practicing week after week, being unconditional love in all situations, not just theoretically, but to be a living energy. So it's a living force, a living power. You don't have to tell people, you just are it. People feel it when you start opening that heart and allowing it to come through. And it impacts and changes the world in which we live. That even as we practice it here, it makes us get better at knowing how to be love out into the world. And we impact the lives on whom we touch. Sometimes in a very noticeable way like that way, and sometimes it's very subtle, but it is real. Love is the most powerful force in this universe. There are many colors, there are many ways it shows up, but for the love of God, show up! I had to work that. Sorry. I got it in there. Woo! So that's what we're here about. Is I share that story about agape, the people in agape, their struggles that were there and continue to grow. May it be an inspiration, just as our spiritual teachers are inspiration. May communities be, including all your communities, may the communities we've been in previously all inspire us to how we want to show up here in the Lighthouse, how we want to show up for ourselves in pure unconditional love, show up for each other, and to show out in the world. Not as theoretical vehicles of love, but actual living realities of pure unconditional love. Let's pray. And I'd like to invite the practitioners to stand and just join me. These are people who have committed to this spiritual community, to say yes to holding all of us in prayer every week. They hold the highest possibility. They're holding that high vibration of love for every one of us. When we can't do it for ourselves, we have these beautiful practitioners who say, I will hold this for you. I love you. I see you. Exactly as Nirvana held me in that moment where I felt so small and lonely. These are the practitioners. And now, even as we see that in the practitioners and the commitment that they have made and feel that, we feel that commitment in our own heart. That we too are on this beautiful journey and are here to commit to one another, to hold each other in the wholeness and in the love on this beautiful and sacred journey. And as we collectively are in this agreement, this collective consciousness, we allow this infinite oceanic love to wash over us. We let the love wash over us, fall and rain down into our every atom and cell of our being. It fills our heart and our body and our mind with light, with love. It is a love that is absolutely free of any walls, separation, judgments. It is love that loves itself passionately and uniquely as each and every one of us in this room and as all the life on this planet. We absolutely open our hearts to all the ways that love shows up. We let go of our own attachment that it has to look one way or another way. We let go of any attachment of that my life has to look this way or that way, and we let love have its way with us. We let love have its way with us right here and right now. We trust it with our whole heart, body, mind, and soul. We give ourselves to it completely, knowing that there may be many bumps along the journey where we feel uncomfortable, where we feel not love. And at the same time, we just keep returning to remember, we are love. We are loved and we are love. And as we continue to return to this, we become master love makers. We are many colors of many lovers. We are that now. Right now in this room, we are madly and passionately in love with the divine, and the divine is madly and passionately in love with us, and all separation is dissolved, and we allow this love to heal our bodies, we allow it to heal our minds and our souls, of our friends, of our family, those people who are needing this love more than ever right now, those people who are feeling small, who are feeling separate, who feel scared, who feel they're just not enough no matter what they do, they're not educated enough, they don't look the right way, they don't feel the right way. They don't have the money. They don't have the time. We all know people who are struggling. Right there in the midst of that, we allow this infinite oceanic power of love to do the healing work. We don't need to do it ourselves. We just are the vehicles and say love, love, and more love is healing our beautiful friends and our family right here and right now. This power is something we can't even imagine, and is so good. It is so good. It is so good. And we just trust it. And even as it's healing, even now through this love consciousness, we allow it and we give our country to it, as our country is in so much divisiveness and pain and fear. There's so many things that are being thrown at us to be afraid of. And we choose love. We choose love. Every single day we return to love is our source. Love is the creator's, is our creator and our creation. It is this country. It is this planet. We return to love for all beings, for all, every condition and circumstance, love. We are the healers and the revealers of the kingdom of heaven. We are the healers and revealers of pure, unconditional, unlimited love. And we become that living reality right here, right now. And all is well. In deep abiding gratitude, we just say, thank you, thank you, thank you, God. We release it. We let it be. And we say together, and so it is. Amen and amen.
We let the love wash over us. We let it be. We let the love wash over us. We let it be. And so it is, and so it is, so it is. Amen. 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 And so it is. Amen. We let it be.
Amen and amen. Woo. Way to go, Jack Quigley.